We assume that in this training session, you will know sources of finance, lessor and the lessee, the relationship, and the aircraft lease cycle. We would be asking these questions. That would be, what is a lease? Why lease? When does lease begin? When does the lease end? And to whom is the lease for? How to select an aircraft? And what will be in a lease process? So in a nutshell, I will be able to give the answers to all this. It's a lease. When we look at the lease, this is the definition that's given in Cape Town Convention and other accepted law statements. It's a contractual obligation between a lessee and a lessor. It's an obligation. It is a contract between them. And when we say it is a contract, what does that contract provide? It provides the lessee the right to use the aircraft, which means when the lessor is leased the aircraft to a lessee has commercial control of the aircraft without owning it. It all depends on the type of lease, whether it's financial lease or operating lease. Assuming that the aircraft is an operating lease, so the lessee will have a commercial control of the aircraft over in lieu of the rent that he pays. So it is a right to use the aircraft for a specific period of time. When we say period of time, it is a lease term. So is it a 3-year lease, 5-year lease, 6-year lease, 10-year lease, 12-year lease? It all depends on the type of lease and the lease, the term. So that needs to be specified. So you have been using as a lessee, you'll be using the aircraft for a period of time. But what do you need to do? You need to pay to the lessor some rent, the periodic rent you need to pay. Again, it depends on the type of a lessee. If it's a government-owned entity, they may not be paying the rent at all. They will have only towards the end some adjustment. In general, the lessee will have to pay a rent to the lessor, who is nothing but the owner of the asset. This is what is the lease process going to be. So that is being established by a lease agreement, which is the contractual obligation, where lessee will have the commercial control and for a definite period of time, and against which the lessee will have to pay periodic payment of rent to the lessor. This is what is the lease is going to be. Okay. When we say lease, as I said, from the perspective of a lessor, when you look at it, leasing is a cash flow management. If you are into a trading business, if you are into a leasing business, your idea is to how much money you will get, how much cash flow you will get it. So upon your investment, how much is the return? So that is the cash flow. And the cash flow, in the sense, you need to get it periodically, not only towards the end of the lease. If you're getting it periodically, then you have a cash flow. So this cash flow is the fundamental concept of leasing. How are you going to manage it and how best you can derive the returns from? So this is the understanding. So the lessor would be looking at how will he manage the lease rent from the lessee, okay? And between one lessee to another lessee, when the aircraft is being in transition, or the lessee is not able to return the aircraft at the end of the lease due to certain issues, so then the aircraft is an off-lease time, okay? If he's not using it, and if it is moving from one lessee to another lessee, there is an off-lease time where aircraft will be lying idle. It is just like a house which is lying idle without giving it for rent. So the idea of the cash flow management is to minimize this off-lease time. And the third point, when we look at it, we are trying to minimize how can we get the better cash flow. The cash flow, you can get it better if you have a standardized aircraft configuration made available to a lessee. What the lessee does later on, it is a different perspective, but the lessor would provide the aircraft with refurbishment and configuration of the aircraft and how much it is standardized. Why standardization mean is the lessor would provide the aircraft to different lessees. All lessees may have a different requirements of the aircraft configuration. Moment you provide the base and standardized configuration, they will be able to modify it at a lesser price. So, and the lessees will be attracted more towards standardized product. For example, the 777. So how do we minimize this exposure to further maintenance? This is another area where leasing would come in. And whenever you are leasing an aircraft, the lessor would always think in terms of its value retention. So the value retention will come in only if the lessor has returned the aircraft with a proper maintenance, so that others can use the aircraft, other lessees can take the aircraft. So the strong return lease conditions are the prerequisite when you think of cash flow management. So these are the concepts that are built into the leasing. Now, to bring into your mind, I think I gave you the handout of this, or I asked you to download the same. This is the kind of lease process in a nutshell. Within the lease process, where exactly the lease transition happens, lease transactions happen, not transition happen. So where does this happen exactly? So let us say the whole process flow in the leasing activity. So here we have an airline and a lessee. I will be going through this so that you understand and get an idea what's happening and what is going to be coming in the process. The airline and the lessee will be thinking about which aircraft to be acquired on lease, and what is the type of aircraft and the configuration. So that they will be thinking about it, and that is the fleet planning and aircraft selection. If you are going to operate on a Udan scheme, which is operative in India, Udan scheme definitely trying to connect tier 2 metros to a major metro possibly. So when you're operating in tier 2 cities, say Pune to Aurangabad, for example, if you're all located in Mumbai region, say Belgaum to Hubli, there is another tier 2 cities. If you're operating in these regions, the type of aircraft that you are going to select will not be a wide body. Even you will have to think whether to look for a narrow body. People generally go for a turboprop like a ATR aircraft, or they go for an Embraer. Such type of aircraft they might choose. So this is where the aircraft selection would come in. What is your business perspective, business goal, business objective, and what you intend to operate? So it's all going to be from the airline and lessee perspective. The second point, from the lessor perspective, how are they going to fund the aircraft for the purchase? So what kind of deals they are going to make? Will they place a bulk order to the manufacturer so that they can negotiate on the price? And what kind of fundings they expect from the financial institutions or the trust or the entities for the aircraft purchase deals? So this is the background that will happen from the lessor and the lessee perspective. Moment the lessor is ready with the aircraft and airline, the lessee has the intent of leasing the aircraft. So then they come across a table-to-table interaction. Across the table it would happen. So that is the intent to lease the aircraft for a defined lease term. If the lease term is bigger, definitely it is going to be a financial lease. If the lease term is smaller, it's going to be an operating lease. So I think you already have a background on operating lease and a financial lease. So the lessor and the lessee will come to a common discussion table where they will talk about the lease. Now, once they are onto the discussion table, what happens is that they need to prepare for the lease. So this is where your lease transactions will begin from. Okay, this is the area where it begins from. Okay, so when I say lease transaction, some amount, it could be exchange of the records, it could be exchange of the document, it could be the allowing the inspections to happen, kind of deposit money they would ask for further negotiation. So all that would be beginning from this point onwards, which is the preparation towards the lease. What happens in the preparation? Lessors will definitely have to evaluate the lessee with respect to This is nothing but a risk assessment of the with respect to a lessee, whether if the lessors lease the aircraft to a lessee, what will happen? Are they financially stable, technically sound, and what are the jurisdictional issues? Suppose if you have leased the aircraft currently in Afghanistan, what would have happened now? So will you take back the aircraft from Afghanistan currently in this scenario? So is it going to happen that way? So the jurisdictional issues will also be coming up. So the lessors will have to evaluate the lessee on the basis of these three parameters minimum. There are other things to look at it, but this is general focal points where the lessor would evaluate the lessee. Then the lessor would have to help the lessee in terms of deal structuring. What kind of financing can be done? Okay, from where you can get the funding from? In which way and the best way you can get the deal done? So lessors will probably help in deal structuring. This is not a deal restructuring. This is deal structuring. Deal restructuring will come in only when the airline is in distress. So we are talking about deal structuring at this moment. So lessor would help the lessee. Even Acumen does this deal structuring. So this is where the lessor would be helping the lessee. And once they have come to a common, the terms of understanding, yes, they have a positive intent of leasing the aircraft. Then on a rough note, they will prepare a letter of intent. So LOI or memorandum of understanding, MOU, will be signed. So that will be the letter of intent. So the letter of intent will have a general the contents, what would be in the lease process, what are the terms and conditions, what will be the rental, it will be approximate where the negotiations would happen in the next step. Over the letter of intent, which is prepared by the lessor and the lessee, okay, and with certain inputs, the lease negotiation would begin in. This is where the lease negotiation art or the science, whatever you call it as, would coming into way. And once the lease negotiation has happened, the lessee will have to really evaluate the aircraft from the technical perspective and the records perspective. So they will be reaching the site and they would be looking at the aircraft physically. There will be a physical inspection, there will be a test flight, and there will be records verification, components installed, everything will be checked by the lessee, the aircraft which is owned by the lessor. Then there will be a lease agreement that would be signed. This is the final document where they will have to have a contract. This is the contractual lease obligation, and that the lessor and the lessee will have to follow. And securities and the initial payment would be done, and further to it, the aircraft delivery would happen, and the place of delivery with what records, and there will be a final acceptance and exchange of records will happen. So this is where now currently the lessee is in the possession of the aircraft. But the transaction did not end here. It continues further in the sense that the aircraft is going to be used, and the lessee has the right to use the aircraft. But though the lessee has the aircraft, the lessor cannot keep quiet just like that. They have to do a monitoring of the aircraft asset, whether they are keeping it in the required conditions or not. There will be periodical inspections without intervening their operations. So this would happen, and with a periodical inspections like a midterm lease inspections or annual inspections will be done by the lessor during the lease term. They will also do the monitoring of not only of the asset, even the lessee, whether they are in a financial distress or not. So all that needs to be evaluated. Again, this is the process where technically they are looking at the transaction. Then comes to the payment of rent and maintenance reserves by the lessee. I do not know how many of you have an idea of what is called as maintenance reserves. So this will be the payment, regular payment would happen. And this is also kind of a transaction that's going on between the lessor and the lessee. Okay. Then there will be towards the end of the lease, there would be a pre-delivery, redelivery, and redelivery. Just a minute. Sorry. So, so there will be towards the end of the lease term, there will be pre-redelivery inspections, that of the aircraft and of the records, and finally redelivery will happen as per the lease return conditions. This is what happens towards the end of the lease. Once the lease term ends, the lessee will ask for the maintenance reserves which he has paid it prior regularly to a lessor. So how much of that can be claimed against the maintenance? So that will also be a part of the lease transaction. And there are possibilities that they may having multiple aircraft, and the maintenance reserves at times can also be adjusted, okay, towards the end of the lease. Certain other deposits or the security instruments can also be adjusted. So that would be happening towards the end of the lease. That is EOL adjustment. Once the all this is being done, there will be a return acceptance certificate that would be provided, and the lessor will accept the aircraft, and the lessee is free from this contractual obligation as per the period. So you know what's happening over here. That is the preparation and lease transaction. So lease transaction not only financial, it is also technical. The technical would include the physical aircraft plus the records. So all that would be a part of the whole story if it runs smoothly, everything. Okay, in a nutshell, further to emphasize what we just discussed, we have a lessor, we have a lessee. The aircraft is given to a lessee on the basis of a contractual, the lease agreement. This is the beginning of the lease, which is known as a delivery phase. So in the delivery phase, there will be some transactions, movement of the aircraft, records in finance. And the lessee will return the aircraft to a lessor towards the end of the lease, that is EOL, and that is nothing but a redelivery. Redelivery phase, this is the delivery phase. So the lessee will return the aircraft. But before taking this, there is a lease term. What is this lease term here? So depending upon the contract, what type of periodicity they have chosen, is it a 6-year or 12-year, 3-year or 8-year, or whatever the term that they have chosen. So within that as well, you will find certain activities. So this is kind of an aircraft lease cycle from delivery to redelivery, and it passes through a lease term. We will look more into it. When you are going to take the aircraft, that is a delivery, the lessee will take the aircraft as delivery point. There exists a lease agreement. So between the lessor and the lessee, there exists a lease agreement, which is a contractual obligation. Whenever this lease cycle ends or towards the end, there will be some issues that are likely to come up. The lessee may have not understood the lease agreement properly or interpreted properly, where lessor points out that we did tell you about this. So there is going to be a kind of a disagreement that happens either from the lessee side or from the lessor side. It is going to be painful from the lessee side because he is obligated by the contract, lease contract. Then they will go into a court. When it goes to a court, what happens is the lessee and the lessor both would be suffering, because in case whoever wins it, they will be gaining a lot. Those who are going to lose it, they'll be losing a lot. So the arbitrator, or the court will have to intervene, because either the parties will go for, obviously, for the court solution. So it all depends whether the country has the laws supporting to the Cape Town Convention, what is being built into the lease agreement. So it all depends on that. So there are likely to be a disagreement that is going to happen. So it is very important, imperative to say here that the lease negotiation should happen properly. If not, there is going to be a disagreement. And disagreement would happen, definitely it is going to be very painful exercise for the lessor, because the lessor cannot lease the aircraft to another lessee during this period. And there is going to be an off-lease time in the court, and they will have to suffer because there is no cash flow coming in now. So it's very important to have a proper contract and make sure that the lessee does understand about it. Okay, now coming to the lease transaction steps, which begin from the delivery to a redelivery. So what happens here? Let us see one by one. Before we move on to the lease transaction, let us look at the lessor and the lessee perspective about the lease transaction. The lessor would look at the cash flows. So what is that cash flow and where does it come from? Okay, what is the purchase price of the aircraft? And if they have purchased the aircraft, and what would be the lease rate or the rent they are going to look from? If they have purchased for say 100 K dollars, more than that, say 500 crores an aircraft, what should be the rent? Say within the 20 years, they should get the expected returns and profitable returns in terms of rent. So they are supposed to expect that. So the calculations will be involved to calculate the rental, the lease rentals. Then they're also getting some amount of a cash flow coming from maintenance reserves. So this will provide an understanding to the lessor that how much money they are going to get it in terms of maintenance reserves. In case of a future maintenance requirement, this corpus, the maintenance reserves, will come into the picture. The residual value of the aircraft will also be the most important matter for lessor. And in dealing this exercise, what are the transaction costs? Okay, maybe the legal expenses, it could be a transaction cost. Movement of the aircraft could be a transaction cost. So there will be some the costs that are associated with the lease process, the transaction cost. How much is that? Then to minimize this, even the travel of the team, of the technical or the financial or commercial or legal team, the travel, again, that would be coming under the transaction cost. And the stamp duties, the taxes will also be the transaction cost. So then they will have to do a technical due diligence of the lessee, whether they have got an air operator permit, do they have sufficient manpower and a trained manpower? So what is that? So that they will have to look at. The lessee will be looking at whether to lease the aircraft or purchase the aircraft straight away. And will they put it on an operating lease? Because that operating lease would provide a flexibility to a lessee. They don't have to shell out an upfront payment. When it comes to transfer of residual value technology risk to the lessor at EOL, so they will be at ease because they don't have to worry about that. And lessee also have a sale and a leaseback as an option. They can buy the aircraft in large quantity. They can give it to the lessor and lease it back. So that would be a sale and leaseback as an option. The lessee would also be having it. So this is the perspective of a lease transaction. So there are certain financial variables that impact lease transactions, which we just discussed: purchase price, lease rentals, maintenance reserve, residual value, and transaction cost. And the lessee perspective, what will be the rent that they are going to pay for, and how much will the maintenance reserves they'll have to shell out along with the lease rent? What are the associated variable costs like fuel, the airport charges, all that, and what is the market condition currently? So that also will play a major role. And will they have an understanding of the lease agreement? And if they are not sure about it, so what happened to few airlines in the past, would I think the airline would pay very heavily in case if they've not understood the lease agreement properly. And when it comes to redelivery, they will have the real pain experiencing it, and they will have an enormous financial impact because the aircraft had to go for a major checks and engine overhaul. If that is a requirement, then it will be a huge financial impact coming up towards the end of the lease. So all that will have to be looked at by the lessee. Okay, I'll be taking on questions with a small break once I complete this prior information, prerequisite information here. So when it comes to the beginning of the lease, so there will be financial variables that we just looked at it. There will be financial transactions that would happen. Okay, it could be the letter of credits and the security deposits that they would take. And in the meanwhile, they will also do a technical due diligence of the lessee. The lessor will have to do it. Then the aircraft preliminary evaluation will be carried out by the lessee, in what condition the aircraft is, or is it a new aircraft or it is a used aircraft. Then there will be a process of letter of intent being signed. Then the lessee will carry out a physical inspection and records inspection. Then you will have a lease agreement being signed, and the aircraft will be delivered to a lessee, and the acceptance will be taken up by the lessee, and the acceptance certificate will be provided by the lessee to the lessor. So this is always going to happen in a delivery phase. Now, is when we say that the second step, technical due diligence, whether the operator is fit to take the aircraft on lease, this evaluation will have to be done by the lessor. So how does that happen in a lease transaction? So the technical visit by the project manager or the team before aircraft is being leased, they will go, and the lessee side, they will inspect the maintenance facilities for the assets, and they will look at and contact and discuss with the quality personnel. And then there will be a technical management, the key people they will be interacting with, whether they are having the requisite licenses and operational experience, or are they taking out operation, the maintenance help from other organizations. Then there will be an awareness that would be created for a contractual requirements. Then the lessor will have to provide, will have to take up a holistic approach to airline evaluation. Just say that I want this rent, they can't give. You need to have a holistic approach. Where is the lessee? What kind of environment they are in? So all that will have to be looked into. So what is that we will see. So within the lease term, there is going to be a periodical inspection that I just mentioned. The lease rent and MR payment would be carried out, and the risk assessment continuously will be done by the lessor about the lessee. Otherwise, their asset is at risk. This happens during the lease term phase. When it comes to return phase, the redelivery phase, what is going to happen here? The lessor would do the aircraft and records, preparation, and this will be done by the lessee, will be provided to a lessor. So the preparation activity would begin, and the lessee will have to prepare the binders of the records, and they have to prepare the aircraft in an MRO environment for keeping the aircraft as per the redelivery conditions. Then there will be return acceptance signed if everything goes as per the redelivery conditions. And there could be EOL compensation, end of lease compensation. In case if they have done ESET, there are 3 steps into the lease negotiation process: a prospecting stage, MOU or the intent of the letter, that is the stage, second stage, and definitive documentation stage. So this is where you will understand the various stages in a lease negotiation process. Once the lease negotiation process ends, then comes into a lease agreement, which is being signed in one or last stage, and the aircraft is ready for lease. Okay, what is a prospecting stage here? As I said, this is a preliminary stage. Needs of the lessee will have to be understood by the lessor, what type of aircraft, new or used. And the lessor will also have to understand what kind of portfolio management currently he is having. Portfolio in the sense, what type of array of aircraft, which type they are having currently, and what is the combination, whether that combination it suits the lessee in a particular zone. Suppose if they are purely low cost operator, the low cost operator may not be intending to have an aircraft configured with a business class. They will really be looking for the single class type, which is economy class. So the portfolio, what they have, they will have to allocate the proper aircraft type and to the lessee. So that would be being discussed in a prospecting stage, and then they will come across the table to discuss more about it. Initially, they are trying to choose the aircraft type, new or old, and what is there in the position of the lessor, that they will discuss. This is what we have. Would you like to go for discussion? Okay, the lessee says this is what I need. I'm ready with okay to going for a used aircraft. So this is the preliminary discussions will happen, and then come to a negotiating table there, where they will discuss more about the aircraft. They will look at what is the kind of interior configuration they have. Not only the cabin configuration, they will also look at what kind of computers, the antennas, whether the aircraft is provided with the USB charging device, okay, across every seat. If that is the case, more electrical power will be consumed and more fuel cost. So do they want to have that? Does it build with in-flight entertainment? Across every seat you will find television screens, small monitors where they can beam the types of videos and the games. So what type of interior configuration? Even the antenna, satellite antenna, for example, you can make a call even in flight. So is that is it aircraft configured with that? That will be under high dollar value avionics in the aircraft, satellite antenna. Okay. Now, what is the engine type? Engine type in the sense, if you have a A320, there are multiple engine options. If it is 737 next generation aircraft, you may have only one type of engine. Engine options you may not have. Even in the engine type, what is the current configuration of the engine in terms of the when was the last maintenance happened? What is the status of life limited parts? So I don't know how many of you are aware of life limited parts. The engines will have certain components, the part of the core engine, wherein which upon certain period, the components will have to be removed even if they are in good condition. So this is mandatory to remove the LLPs after its expiry. So they are very costly, basically. They're very costly. So what is the life of those LLPs? That will also be discussed under engine type. And the takeoff weights. The aircraft is configured more of towards the cargo or more towards the passenger type. So the passenger cargo combination people will have generally, but is it catering to more of a cargo, less of a passenger, or which type it is? It is called high gross weight and low gross weight. So, and that will be the combination takeoff weights. And the thrust, engine thrust. So even if you want to vary the engine thrust, which is the possibility, the range that the engine manufacturer has provided, what kind of thrust you are going to choose? If you are going to choose a higher thrust, engine will require a shop visit much early. Okay, because of the higher thrust rating that's being put in. And if you are trying to use for a multiple thrust rating, the LLP life limit will also be changing accordingly with the different formula. So the remaining hours will have to be calculated. So what type of thrust you are going to operate for? And what is the current status of the aircraft with respect to maintenance requirements? When is the next major check is due for maintenance? So all that will have to be looked in. Apart from that, the dollar value of the avionics components. I'm just referring to IFE. I'm just referring to the satellite antenna. Okay, this is in the prospecting stage. And why is this required? Because the airline requirement and the aircraft configuration, they want it to be very attractive. So they will choose a particular seat color, the galley, the lab, the carpet, IFE, the lighting, which is called as a mood lighting. So aircraft livery, so they will be looking at all this. That is because it affects their brand. When it comes to the operational perspective, whether they want the navigation systems, okay, what type of navigation system, and even looking at the Cat 2, Cat 3 landing, whether it is equipped with, capable of. So all that will be, have to be discussed. And plus, short field performance. What is short field performance is, the aircraft is heavily loaded, and do you require a particular length of the runway, or you can do a good takeoff with a short field itself, with a shorter runway length. So whether the aircraft is equipped with such SFP options, short field performance options. So again, is it intending to work under cold weather, operations? So that will also be a requirement for customization. So uh, the customer and the lessor would be getting a document about the specification and what kind of combination it has got, what is the baseline configuration, what type of the design it is, and what is being customized to it. Could be supplier furnished equipment or buyer furnished equipment. So what kind of equipment you want the aircraft to have or to as a baseline configuration, and what you want to add to it, that is the feature packages that will also be under aircraft customization. And the over the period, the manufacturer would also do a kind of a improvement in terms of airworthiness directive or service bulletins and some performance improvements. So that will also be a part of this. And finally, you will have one final document, which is the specification of the aircraft. So this is the spec, the aircraft that you have chosen. You want it to be, the lessor wants it to be written in the same configuration. Okay, that's the expectation. So you need to know what is mirror in, mirror out, concept, mirror in, mirror out. The way you look at the mirror, the aircraft looks like the same configuration they want it even after the redelivery. So mirror and mirror out requirements. So same spec you need to maintain. The engine, for example, fitted on it, same engine will have to be returned if that engine has lost its life due to incident or an accident. So there could be a substituting engine, maybe equivalent to that, maybe of a higher value of it. So that needs to be installed. So that will be again a part of the lease agreement. So you need to stick to the specification document. Okay. Now the next step, we just looked at the prospecting stage, number one. We will look at the next stage, which is the memorandum of understanding or letter of intent stage. So what is letter of intent? Okay, this is just a kind of an acceptance that we are moving ahead towards the finalization of the lease, and let us sort out certain issues. And what those issues would be: how much will be the rent, how much will be the cost, what would happen, can we negotiate on the cost, so can we negotiate on certain other elements, so can we negotiate on redelivery conditions. Redelivery conditions, that one of that I can just tell you across: the aircraft will have to be returned to the lessor by the lessee towards the end of the lease, where the aircraft need not go for major maintenance within 3,500 hours, for example. So less than 3,500 hours, the aircraft should not be going for a shop visit. So this will be the kind of redelivery condition that is being put across. So the remaining hours on the airframe or on the LLPs, they want it to be somewhere around 3,500, 3,000. So it all depends, 6,500 hours. So if it has to go for a major maintenance check, how many hours are left? How many cycles are left? So depending upon that, redelivery conditions will be built upon. Can they negotiate on that? Okay. So do you want the aircraft to fresh from the shop? So what are your expectations? So those things will be looked into. So this is the negotiating happens, and the letter of intent will be prepared. And generally the expectations will be quite high. And then they will be, narrowing it down to acceptable, terms and conditions. So they will be looking at the agency and the type certification data. Okay, is it from which MRO, where the delivery would happen, and AD compliance requirements. Then the condition of the airframe, landing gear, APU, engines, and the documentation related to it, the library, interior condition, upholstery requirements, and the IFE, and the demonstration flight, who will fly and how long they will fly. So all that would be much more to it. This is a simpler one. So more of that would happen in a letter of intent. That will be written now. That will be written, and they will be looking at that. But this is not a binding. there is no binding here, but yes, this is where the positive intent has come from the lessor and the lessee to lease the aircraft. There only they start putting up the terms and conditions across using the term called as a letter of intent, the document called as letter of intent. Now, so the letter of intent, lessee perspective on delivery conditions. And so you can look at the lessee perspective. Lessor delivers, lessee takes it. So the expectation here comes on when was the last major maintenance happened, and is there any requirement for major maintenance? So one of the expected condition with from the lessee, they will be looking at this. Moment I start using it, if it requires an engine shop visit, so what do we do? So what is the current maintenance status on it? So that will be one of the expectation. And lessor perspective, okay, you see here, lessee one returns the aircraft, lessor takes it, which is a redelivery. This lessor now leases the aircraft back to another lessee, which is nothing but a delivery. So when he is taking from the lessee as a redelivery, he is going to deliver it to another lessee. So this lessee will have to accept the conditions in which this lessee has returned the aircraft. Is it going to be agreeable? So the lessor will always work in such a way that this aircraft redelivered by the lessee number one will be easily acceptable by the lessee number two. So this is how they are going to term the conditions of redelivery. So this lessee will accept LLP life limit remaining on the engine equal to 3000 cycles. So this is accepted to the lessee. So similar conditions and expectations, the lessor would keep it from the initial draft from the when they're placing it for the lessee number one. So they're trying to match the requirement. So this process of moving from one lessee to another lessee is known as transition, aircraft transition, which is also known as a redelivery. But here, the aircraft is moving from one lessee to another lessee. We call it as a transition. So during the redelivery period, this lessee will also come in and try to see whether the conditions are being met with in order to accept as per their agreement. So all the good, heavily influenced and high-tempered environment you will find at the time of redelivery. Very difficult redelivery conditions to be exercised by the to be met by the lessee. So it's very, very difficult. Okay. Now the second last stage is the documentation stage. It is the final stage of the lease negotiation process. There they will execute the lease agreement. And once the lease agreement is executed, signed by both the parties, it becomes a legal binding. It is a legal binding, you can understand. It will also have a court. It will also have onto the international rules and regulations, supported by Cape Town Convention ratification and signed by the contracting states, say India for that matter. So it all depends where the lessee is located. That is a contracting state. A country, and it will the document will spell out in detail all the terms and conditions. And during the process, okay, the company would look, lessor and the lessee would look for the approvals, and it will go into different draft stages, and there will be further discussions about the draft, and then there will be a final signature that will happen onto the documentation. In terms of lease agreement. This is all going to happen in the final stage of the lease negotiation. So you are now with aircraft on one side, aircraft and records on one side. On the other side, you have the lease agreement. Just a minute. All right. Okay. Aircraft moving, hovering around, helicopter hovering around. There is some background disturbance. Okay. Now, who are involved in the transaction of the lease? Lessor side and a lessee side, The titles may vary according to the type of company and their workout. And we will have the marketing team, the aircraft configuration team if there's a new aircraft, the technical team, the credit committee or the finance committee, and the legal and contracts team will be there from the lessor side. From the lessee side, there will be a fleet manager or a CEO or the CFO, chief financial officers, and the maintenance personnel will need to be involved into it. There will be a board that is constituted as the contract. Okay, so and finally, you will also be taking the some immediate help, term help from the legal expert. They may not be having a legal expertise with them, but they may hire legal experts for drafting the contract. This is where the probably I would say the Kingfisher failed in order to understand the contract type. So it failed really at that area, and so the cost was very, very high. Okay, so it's this is though it is English literature, but it has got a lot of implications when it comes to lease agreement. Now, in a lease agreement, you have to look for these focal points, need to be focused upon very badly here. One is the financial terms and conditions, the technical. I'm just telling you about the aircraft configuration, the LOPA, the livery, the engine type, thrust rating, the cargo loads, and aircraft takeoff weights, okay, and the maintenance status of this, all these airframe engines and the landing gears, APU, and where exactly the aircraft is going to be operational from. The lessee is located in Dubai and he wants to operate the aircraft in India. Is that acceptable? So what will be the jurisdictional requirements? Which is the contracting state? Contracting state is in Dubai, where the aircraft is going to be operated is in India, which means the jurisdictional issues will crop up. Is it going to solve? So later on, if there is a default or insolvency, how are they going to take the aircraft back, repossess back? So a lot of jurisdictional issues will be coming in. In case if the lessee, the defaults, what will happen now? So what kind of legal provisions are available? Okay, what are the contracting state rules and regulations, the court rules? Whether the the contracting state has ratified and accepted and signed the Cape Town Convention or not? Whether I don't know how many of you are aware of IDERA, so irrevocable de-export authorization. So is IDERA signed by the initially? Do they have such agreement in place? And plus operational requirement. So operational requirements in the sense that multi-thrust operation is one, and they're going to use it for, say, the environment that where it is going to be. Say if it is going to be UAE, the Gulf sector, so the engines will have a lesser life because of hot environment. So how many hours they're going to operate projected? If they operate in excess of what is being projected, the rents may vary. So, and for the excess operation, they may take a higher rent. So all that would be into the lease agreement, points that will have to be discussed. So if you look at typically, you will be able to download the same sample lease agreement at the end of this session. You have an option to download, and that will be triggering only after the end of the session. So here you have aircraft lease document, the contents of it. The rental rate will be defined, the lease term will be defined, what kind of deposit they're going to provide will be talked about. The jurisdictional risk associated will also be defined. The credit risk, what will happen and how, that will be defined. Insurance, who is going to pay, what will be the premium, and who will be the party, and what will be the insurance level. Is it a hull insurance or the whole aircraft insurance? And does that provide a quiet enjoyment? What is quiet enjoyment is the airline will operate the aircraft without the intervention of the lessor. Lessor should not come and say that you stop the flying now. They can't say that unless there is a default. The default condition will also be mentioned in the aircraft lease agreement. And the hell or high water clause, irrespective of whatever happened, the commitment is the lessee will have to pay. So there is a hell and high water clause. The aircraft redelivery conditions, which is the key to the lease agreement will be spelled out. What will be the aircraft specifications and the condition? What will be the redelivery condition? That's a repeat. This is delivery. This is redelivery. At what conditions it was delivered? At what conditions will be redelivered? And what are the maintenance covenants? Okay, liens, covenants associated with that, and maintenance reserves. So all will be a part of the lease agreement. So at the end of the session, you'll be able to download a sample lease agreement. So go through that and you will have all this data that will be mentioned in a document. That is a very simple lease document, what is being given to you. Go through that, and even if you visit IATA website, you will be able to download a LOI as well as lease agreement draft. So that is free and you can download the same. Okay, other technical provisions in a lease agreement would come in terms of AD cost sharing. The AD will be expensive in certain cases, and if the AD is going to cost them very heavily, the operator, so what will happen? That's what they were looking at in the beginning. So in case if the AD cost is going to be very high, there is a formula within the lease agreement which they will have to use. If it goes beyond a threshold value, the cost will be shared by the lessor. Okay, because the AD is going to be permanent on the aircraft and it is going to be used by some other operator later on. So why this lessee will have to pay currently for this? So there will be a cost sharing agreement for airworthiness directives which they are going to carry out on the aircraft. Now, the lessor does not want the PMA parts. What are PMA parts? I don't know how many of you are aware what's PMA parts here. The aircraft components are very expensive and lessor wants the OEM manufactured components to be installed on the aircraft. But there was a kind of a discussion why we have to pay so much higher price for these components. Certain association, okay, came forward and they manufactured the component in the similar requirements and the expectation. They got the approval from the regulatory that they are fit to fly, they are airworthy, and it is equivalent to what manufactured by the OEMs. But such parts are called as PMA parts, which are less expensive if you want to buy from a OEM. But the lessor does not want them to be on the aircraft, though they are equally airworthy. But whether the next lessee will accept such PMA parts. In case if the engine certain PMA parts are installed, the entire set of the PMA parts will have to be removed and the new ones will have to be installed because next lessee does not want the PMA parts. So the lease agreement will have to spell out clearly on the approval for PMA parts. And other one is subleasing and pooling of engines. Do they have the provisions of sublease to another operator? So that will also be spelled out very clearly in the lease agreement. So these are the technical provisions. At the end of the lease, when it comes to an end, there are possibilities for early termination if that option is chosen by the operator. Which means that the lessor, they will not be happy. Lessee wants to keep the aircraft as much as possible with the lessor wants to keep the aircraft as much as possible with the lessee. So lessor does not want early termination of the contract. So in case if the lessee does not want to fly that aircraft anymore, is there an early termination option? It happened with Jet with respect to A330. We wanted to terminate, the Jet wanted to terminate the contract, but that was not possible because the condition wasn't there in the lease agreement. They have to continuously pay the rent, and they were operating, the Jet was operating the aircraft A330 and 777 between Mumbai and Delhi, between Chennai and Delhi, between Kolkata and Delhi, which is very, very expensive to operate such wide-body aircraft because the moment you take off and land, one cycle is consumed for the engine. So the engine life and engine payment will increase, but they can't keep it on the ground because there is no early termination option that is available. They can't deploy the wide body to some other place because they don't have enough market. So what do? If they fly, it is 2 crore loss. If they keep, it is 1 crore loss. So option will have to be chosen. So whether you keep it or fly, you are going to be under loss. It is better that we fly. Okay, or better that we keep it on the ground. So it depends on the decision that you need to take. And there are possibility to extend the lease term. So that option can be exercised. Or if it is a financial lease, for example, there is also an option to purchase the aircraft, because you don't have to put more money into taking another aircraft and repaint it, reconfigure it, and some transactional costs, binding costs, legal agreements. So many things will come in. It is better that they keep running the same aircraft further. So there are purchase options are also available for the lessee. So these are the end of the lease options in the lease agreement spelled out. These are opt-in, opt-out, conditions. You can choose them, and based on that, the lease agreement will have to be signed. So coming to the summary here, okay, and before that, I asked you a question: lease negotiation is an art or science? So we just saw the poll there. A lot of calculations. The opinion came in. Many were accepting that to the science and an art, and few. I really appreciate those who had chosen science or those who had chosen art. Their conviction is very, very strong. So irrespective whether answer is correct or not, at this moment I will put the lease negotiation is also an art, apart from being it science. In which way it is science? In which way it is art? Okay, so we'll come to this, the lease contract and lease negotiation process. What are the key elements in this before we move on to the art or science? What is this actually in the lease contract and lease negotiation process? The key elements associated with that. So one of the key element you look at is the sale and the leaseback option, lease term, lease rentals, tax spec, okay, return conditions, and in case if there is a deviation on the return conditions, how will they compensate it? Security deposits, maintenance reserves, and other risk mitigants and covenants. And now, do they have any restrictions on quiet enjoyment? Moment the aircraft is leased, it is the perspective of the lessee how they're going to operate it for. But they need to be monitored. That's a different story. But do they enjoy quietly the usage of the aircraft? And in case if they're not going to use it, then they may sublease. So subleasing is happening in which jurisdiction? Is it restricted one? And the AD compliance and cost sharing, okay, and the applicable PMA parts and the specification changes to it. Now, is it being allowed? So these are the key elements for renegotiation, okay, or in the lease agreement negotiation time. So coming to lease negotiation is an art or a science. So I will provide you some answer here. So before they start the lease negotiation, if they call it as an art or a science, but they must think what is the must that the lessor and lessee will look for. Okay, maybe the aircraft configuration. This is what is the requirement. Secondly, non-essential issues. Let us keep it out. So why should we discuss about non-essential things now? And the bottom line position. This is where, okay, I will provide a minimum of rent this much, maximum of rent this much. Or they will say only the minimum rent this much only is our capability, and this is going to be our, the banking requirements, and we will be financing it this way. So these are the bottom line positions which the lessee will have to take. The lessor will also have to have their own position, because moment you are going for a lease agreement, within 15 days I need this much of money as security and the in advance letter of credits. So there could be some bottom line positions which they will look for, okay, before they begin to go in for negotiation. So lesser perspective, what is the deal price of the asset if they are buying it, and what is the configuration, return conditions, asset and asset financeability, lessee's financeability. So based on that, they are going to work out on economic returns. This will have to be calculated based on at what price they purchased, at what is the configuration, and what would be the return conditions, And will they, if they lease it to a lessee, will they return it back in the same configuration? And what is their credibility? So all that would be looked at. They will also look at risk associated with the asset. They will have to estimate and they will have to recover in advance quickly the the involvement of or the projected risk associated with the lessee. So if it is a startup airline, they don't know the lessee at all. They don't have any background. They will only say that this is the bank balance and they may not have any operational experience in this. So they will have to weigh the options about the risk which is associated with the lease. So lease will be structured to include the mitigants to the key risk which I'm talking about in terms of rental rate, maintenance reserves, financial covenants, and security deposits. Okay, what will be the lessee and looks at? Lessee looks at on the lease rate, the terms, and he wants to keep the flexibility as much as possible. So they want to keep such flexibility here, and they want to minimize as many restrictions as possible and obligations as much as possible. So they will be looking at these areas. This is on the lessee perspective. Based on this lessee and the lessee perspective, I'll move on to the whether it is an art or a science. Friends, it's going to be a science and art. In which way it is science, in which way it is going to be an art. If I talk about AD cost sharing, the cost sharing cannot be an art. It has to be a science. It involves formulae. If you want to look at a lease rate rental that they're going to get it from, again it is going to be a calculation involvement. They cannot just throw away a price. They can ask for a lease rent. They will have to have some strong financial calculations, and at what price the aircraft was acquired and what rentals they're going to look at, what are the financing costs they're going to pay, interest on the borrowed cost, and what are the return requirements in the business. So all that will have to be calculated mathematically, and it is a science. So it is a science because it involves calculations. Exact estimates will have to be brought in. When the exact estimates are brought in, that will have some range. If the minimum lease rent is coming at say 3,000 hours, $3,000 okay per 10 hours block, or $300 per hour. $300 per hour is the minimum thing. So they can quote to the lessee, we want $450 per hour. Then comes to the negotiation, then it becomes an art. So it all depends on the type of lessor and the type of lessee, the kind of a transaction, the zone, the market dynamics, and what kind of security covenants they are trying to provide. So it all depends, and that can be negotiated. Negotiating table, will be dealt through an art, but the basic foundation will be built by the calculation. So that would be the science. So this is where the art and science of the negotiation would come in. So this is what the negotiation or the transactions would involve.